Alex Olmsted is an internationally acclaimed puppet theater and filmmaking company that has been the recipient of 2 Jim Henson Foundation grants. They create puppet magic in many different mediums and will be performing live at the 2023 National Puppetry Festival. I talked to Alex and Olmsted about their path to puppetry, their wonderful shows including Milo the Magnificent, and much more on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media, and now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Alex and Olmsted, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Grant. Hello, dear listeners at home.
We are grateful to be here.
I am so excited to talk to both of you, and your work is just so great, and I'm excited to kind of delve a little deeper. Unfortunately, I don't think I've ever gotten to see any of your performances live, but I've seen a lot of the stuff that you've done on video, and just absolutely blown away. So I'm excited to talk to you about all of this. But I'm going to start like I normally do on this show, and that is ask about both of you your first exposure to puppetry.
Sure. Olmsted, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll launch. I can't deny that the world of American puppetry on television had an indelible impact on me growing up. I have to say, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and also Sesame Street. There's no question that growing up with those characters, and The Muppet Show too, growing up with those characters had an influence on me. I'd also like to point out an experience of seeing Bread and Puppet live in Vermont when I was a teenager with my family, and that loomed large in my imagination, so much so that when I ended up pursuing theater professionally later on, I signed up for an apprenticeship with them.
Yeah, they're super well known, legendary almost, you would say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Alex, how about you?
I think basically the same. I know it's sort of the common answer is Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I was thinking about it before talking with you today, though, and I don't really remember like the first time that I registered it being puppetry on those shows. Though it was always like the characters. I'm sure at some point I realized, but I remember, always loving those shows, and then growing up watching like Labyrinth. We had Labyrinth on VHS, bootlegged off TV, and my brother and I would just watch it over and over. And I think at some point I must have realized, like, oh yeah, like I get that they're like, some of them are people in suits, but then some of them are puppets, and that switch turning over for me.
For both of you, growing up was. Were you feeling like, oh, I have to be a performer as a youngster? Was that always something that was there, or did the sort of performing bug come later to you?
I didn't always know that I wanted to be a performer, but I always liked performing and having some sort of rehearsed bit. When I was a kid, I think before acting, I got really into magic, and so I would find all the, kid magic books that I could find and just totally like pour over them in my bedroom and learn a couple tricks. And then anytime there was a family reunion or any kind of gathering of grown-ups, I'd always try and find a way to be like, oh, okay, let me do my trick. And then I'd set it up and it would go kind of wrong. And then I'd just like go run and learn another one and then come back and do that one. And and we ended up making, one of our big shows is Milo the Magnificent, which is about an aspiring young magician in which everything goes wrong. So I think that's very much me at that age.
It's autobiographical.
Yeah, exactly.
Like great enthusiasm
and zero rehearsal.
Preparation.
Which is, yeah.
And how about you, Olmsted? Were you performing at a young age?
Yes, I think, well, first off, I just recalled a memory I hadn't thought of in a long time about a puppetry exposure moment from when I was a child.
Sure.
And I'm moved to share in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was taken to see a shadow puppet show at this little place called the Mickey Theater. And I'll never forget how dark the room was and how the screen of the shadow puppetry set was just glowing. It was living magic. No question.
Yeah. Especially at a young age to see a shadow show like that. Because I don't think I've ever saw a shadow show until I was much older, but I can see as a kid we're just like, wow, what is happening? This is amazing.
Truly. I mean, it's illusions layered on more illusions.
Yeah.
But to speak to performing, I think I danced from a very young age. My mother was a ballerina and she was my teacher, so I was familiar with recitals and performing in choruses and doing group numbers. But there was a pivotal moment when we moved. I became very shy in this new city and community. And I signed up for a theater class in part because I wanted to get out of my shell. And I'll never forget the first time I did a monologue in that classroom, looking to check in with the teacher afterwards. And her jaw was open, almost like she was very impressed. In this way that made me think, oh, maybe I'm good at this. And just that sense of approval that I could read from her, and that feeling of getting it right, and also making it through, because I felt like I was going to throw up the whole time. There's no question I still get a major adrenaline rush before a lot of performances, and I can understand those physical cues when they come on, that know how to mediate them and maintain composure and translate the energy into focused energy on the stage, as opposed to I'm going to throw up energy backstage. But being a kiddo and doing something I was so frightened of, and coming out on the other side of it, having a sense of perhaps doing it well, made me think, okay, I gotta follow this.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's almost like addicting. Like, hey, I did this really scary thing, and there's that emotion of doing it, and then it went well. So it's like, hey, I'm going to do this again and again. Yes,
I totally understand people that like to do, what do you call it? Sort of adventure-seeking sports
like
enthusiasts, thrill-seeking.
Like adrenaline junkies.
Adrenaline junkies, exactly. Yeah. Who'll bungee jump and do all kinds of crazy things and put themselves in harm's way. I feel like doing theater is a it's a constant scenario of throwing myself into the wolf's mouth and hoping I don't get eaten alive, but also having a sense that I'll make it out alive. And that thrill is certainly a part of the game. The fear and the catharsis.
Yeah, I think that's also one of my favorite things about seeing, like, school plays. Olmsted has a whole slew of younger brothers and sisters, and so I've gotten to see a lot of, like, middle school theater in our time together, and it's always great. I love it, because you see those kids have that same experience that she did at that age, where, like, you have a kid who's, like, standing on the edge of the stage, like, mouthing the lead's lines the whole time, and then they, like, turn and say their one line, and it gets a reaction, and just this, like, glee washes over their face of, like, oh my god, I want to feel this way forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Olmsted, you mentioned your mom was artistic as a ballerina. Did both of you grow up in, like, sort of creative households? Because you're both very creative, like going through your website and everything. You guys are super creative. So was that kind of nurtured growing up?
I'd say definitely, in my experience, my creativity was nurtured growing up. My mom was a dancer. Her father was an actor. His father was a musician. And there was no expectation that I would carry the torch, so to speak. But when I was very young, I had this sense that was a part of my identity. And in pursuing a path that my ancestors pursued, I felt a very powerful sense of belonging. This is this is who I am. This is where I'm going to go. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I felt very certain that I wanted to continue that legacy, so to speak. And my mother didn't have family members who were still alive by the time I came around, so learning about my family was also through much through an oral tradition, her telling stories about them, and then every once in a while sharing some magazine clippings. And I'm fortunate to be friends with a student of my great-grandfather's. But the long and short of it is that I was very fortunate to grow up in an environment where my great-grandfather's paintings were on the wall, and my grandfather's playbills were on the bookshelf, and photographs from his theater days, and photographs of my mother as a dancer, and getting to see my mom dance, and taping recordings of the great performances on PBS and watching them over and over and over again, whether it was ballet or Broadway. Culture was very healing, and there was such an appetite for it in the home.
Yeah, Alex, how about you?
I didn't come from a big family of artists. My dad's mother was a painter, but she passed away before I was born. But we also had the paintings hanging up, so that was always an inspiration. But I think I did grow up in a household that was very encouraging of creativity. My mom is incredibly creative, and she was always coming up with craft projects and art projects for me and my brother to do when she was taking care of us when we were young. Looking back on my childhood, I think like the biggest influence was like we didn't have cable TV, and we sort of lived out in a more rural area where we didn't have a bunch of neighbors or other activities to go do. So it was a lot of like, go play in the woods. So we spent a lot of time playing in the woods and getting creative out there, and tying sticks together and making forts. And then also just having like a big messy garage full of stuff, which still exists there. And now we have our own big messy garage full of stuff. And just having like, you know, I think the best thing you can have for a kid is like a pegboard with a bunch of old tools on it that you're not worried about them, you know, ruining because they're really nice tools. It's like a junky hammer and a saw, and then a big box of scrap wood and like a mason jar of assorted nails, and like just free reign to make whatever you want. So I was always out there nailing stuff together.
Excellent. Yeah, both of you have very, nurturing, I guess, would say, as because you just hear stories of parents being like, "You're gonna do what? What are you gonna do? No, you're not gonna do that. You're gonna do this." So that's great to hear, and it certainly shows in all your creative work. Did both of you like go to school for performing? Like I'm talking about university and stuff like that. Did you both study performing in university?
Yes, I went to Eastern Connecticut State University for 2 years right out of high school. Unfortunately, puppetry wasn't on my radar at that time, and it's like a 15-minute drive from Yukon. So I was like, oh my God, there was like amazing puppetry right up the street from me that I could have, not taken classes at because I didn't get into Yukon, but I could have gone and seen, student slams and stuff and been exposed to that. But really, I was focused on live theater, just acting. And then after Connecticut, 2 years of Connecticut, I took some time off and worked and moved back to Tennessee where I grew up, and then finished up at Middle Tennessee State University with a degree in theater, concentration in acting. And also at that time, I was doing like work study in the scene shop, which turned out to be a huge influence, just gaining that love and knowledge of proper set construction and prop construction and painting and all sorts of fabrication. Because then, even though my main focus was still on acting, then when I moved to DC to pursue acting, I could get on all these overhire lists for theaters that needed carpenters at the last minute, and I'd go and work in a bunch of theaters while I was auditioning. And of course, then I had the fabrication skills when we decided to make our own work together, now I can build things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And help supervise when I'm building.
Yeah.
You have such a wealth of knowledge, Alex, and it just keeps expanding. And it's amazing how those rudimentary and formative experiences you had in the scenic workshop are really playing out in full force for us on a pretty much daily basis.
Yeah, I'd say, like, if there are any young performers out there who are like, ooh, what the heck am I going to do after I graduate? Like, don't just pigeonhole yourself into only accepting work in the thing that you think you want to do right now. Open yourself up to all the other possibilities of tertiary experiences that you've had. If you've done a lot of theater acting, you probably have at least enough experience to be an assistant stage manager, even if you've never done stage management, which is incredibly difficult and useful to do it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But be an ASM and learn skills there, and then you can SM for a show until smaller shows until you can get your legs there. You can do overhire carpentry, you can do painting, you can do electrics, you can get on a run crew. Like, there's so much work out there if you just broaden those horizons.
There's so much work, and theater, I mean, it's a village. It's not just the performers. Everyone who brings these different skills contributes equally to make this crazy thing work. I mean, from front of house to the marketing department, to, doing the actual writing of the plays, to the performing itself, to, as you mentioned already, Alex, the carpentry, overhire work, the building. I mean, every person that comes into a building to work towards the creation of something is contributing equally and contributing with very essential skills. And there's something too about broadening your horizons. I think, to speak to Alex, what you were mentioning about not just pigeonholing yourself into a specialty. Well, I'm a performer and this is what I went to school for, or this is what I do best. That's not good holistically for yourself as a soul and as a being. I mean, we are more than one thing. And I think it's good to take as many opportunities as you can to expand your skill set, learn a new language, learn to play an instrument or an instrument you don't know. Anything to kind of wake up the mind and place you in a spot that's uncomfortable and challenging, and that, expands your horizons a little more, will invariably open more doors as well. Socially, economically. I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because even though it's, when you go into a theater, if you're get hired as a, set builder, because I need an extra set builder on the thing, you're still networking. And so much of this business of performing, whether it's wherever, in theater, in television, in movies, whatever it is, it's knowing people and people who like to work with you. And so even if you're doing set stuff, somebody finds out, oh, you do puppets as well? Oh, that's interesting. And then, oh, we need a puppeteer for this thing. Oh, okay, we can bring you in there. So there's no downside at all.
Exactly. And, even if you don't make those direct connections, it's so valuable, like working in a scene shop or working in a paint shop and getting the vibe for a theater at that level. Because, like, if people are not treating, like, the overhire carpenters well, chances are they're not treating the actors well either. So you may be able to, like, make a decision if they reach out to you in the future about a role that doesn't pay very well, but it's great exposure. Then you're like, well, actually, I kind of get a bad vibe from you. So I know what to stay away from. Yeah, but also, like, having the bigger picture of treating all those people with equal respect, like Olmsted was saying, that it takes everyone to put it together. And sometimes it's very easy as an actor whose face appears on stage to think, like, oh yeah, it's all about me. Like,
right.
I get the applause at the end. Like, I get recognized in the lobby, which then became something we really loved about theater, is your face not being seen, and, like, being able to take the ego out of
Puppet theater.
Oh yeah, puppet theater. I'm sorry. one of the things that we love about puppetry is it's so much easier to take the ego out of the performer. And, you can do a puppet show and then walk into the lobby afterwards and nobody knows that you were in it. Like, that's such a good feeling.
It's so sneaky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Olmsted, what was your education like? Were you studying performing and stuff in college?
I did. And however, I did not go to a conservatory. I had a sense going into college that I wanted to learn a little bit of everything, and I didn't want one specific direction in my studies. So I went to Sarah Lawrence College, and sure enough, did a little bit of everything, and did the shows, and joined in a group that started midnight performances on Fridays in a lecture hall every week, where we came up with our own sketches and routines. And I'd say my education at Sarah Lawrence was certainly rich, not only from the time in the classroom, but for all of the times that I threw myself into these wacky scenarios with my friends, where we gave ourselves the challenge of having to come up with something from nothing on a weekly basis to perform at midnight in a lecture hall. And I think that still feels like we're doing that still now.
Well, I mean, I can totally see the line drawn from that to then doing like puppet slams and knowing like, oh, great, there's an opportunity to perform every month something new. Like, yeah, let me have this idea. Let me throw it together with a friend. Let me put it up on its feet. Let me do something else.
Too short to suck.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, now, how did you two meet and start working together?
We met both as gigging actors here in D.C. On a Bulgarian folk show called Hopa Tropa.
And this Bulgarian folk show incorporated found object puppetry. Objects that one may find in a traditional Bulgarian home. And we performed at embassies around the city and at the Kennedy Center. And the director, Lilia Slavova, was Bulgarian, as was the choreographer, as was the scene designer, and the lead puppeteer, Julia Tasheva. And then they hired a couple of Americans to join in on the fun. And boy, was it fun. It was also, I think, not only the show that we met doing, but our first experience doing puppetry and our first experience doing what was essentially devised theater.
Yeah, I was very surprised as, a guy who went to school for theater and thought, oh yeah, when you're an actor, you're handed a finished script and then you do that script. It was very surprising to be cast in a devised show where you were expected to also generate the material, essentially, which was very destabilizing at first, but then I was like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. And now it's basically like 95% of what we do is devised theater.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the theater that you do. Now, you have a huge body of work, and due to time constraints, we'll just touch on a few of them. But, of course, I have to ask about Milo the Magnificent, because it's amazing. I hope someday to see the full show in person. I've seen little clips. But and I think we've already touched on this, but where did the idea from this come from? We talked about it possibly being autobiographical, but but also not just where the idea for that came from, but the whole idea to use this style of puppet to do it.
Sure. The idea sort of came to me in 2010, 2011-ish. I was on tour with a children's theater company in Singapore, and so I had a lot of time in my hotel room to like sketch ideas and sort of work on things there. But right before leaving, Olmsted and I had been watching a lot of archived video of Momenchance, the experimental Swiss mime, mask, and puppetry group, who we just got to see here in DC. They're doing a 50th anniversary tour. So we had just watched a bunch of stuff of theirs, and their sort of experimentation with material and non-traditional puppetry forms really, really stuck with me. And so I was thinking a lot about the sort of mask that changes, which they've explored in several pieces. But I wanted to try sort of a flat face with changing expression pieces. And so at first I was thinking about sort of a round sheet metal face with magnetic bumper sticker type, switch out the eyes and mouths and everything. And then eventually it came to me in a dream to do what it as it exists now, which is sort of this simple flippable mechanism, sort of like a Rolodex. But he can sort of switch through a variety of faces very quickly to help support the rest of the body mask.
And it did come to Alex in a dream. And I think that's so incredible.
I read in an interview that you did that you said that he's capable of like something like 13 different expressions or something. And maybe more by now because this was an older interview, but because you may have developed it more. But it's just incredible.
Oh, thanks. I think actually we've simplified it down to 9 now. It helps the faces sit a little tighter, and also it forces you to be a little more creative with how they're used. You know, some of them are very, very specific. Like he has these crazy hypnotism eyes, and it only gets used once in the show. And then there are several others which can be interpreted different ways depending on how the body gesture supports that. So he has, one face that flips down, and it's an eyes closed and a mouth very, short, thin horizontal line, which then, you can imagine the rest of your body if you slump the shoulders and have sort of a dejected little sigh, maybe knees knocked a little together, pigeon-toed. There's that sort of sad, depressed rejection, shame. Or if it's a little more upright and pointer finger and thumb together, it's a very sort of meditative, I'm preparing for great focus kind of thing, which is a really fun thing to do, and also really interesting to talk to kids after the show if there are kids in the audience and they come up.
And to explain to the listeners who are listening in right now, Milo is worn around Alex's neck and suspended essentially over his chest. So Alex's hands are Milo's hands and Alex's feet are Milo's feet. So as Alex is describing these different body movements that his body takes on as he's wearing this mask puppet, that's able to inform so much of the emotional landscape of the character.
Yeah. I came back from Singapore and worked with Olmsted to create a short, 7-minute, basically slam-length piece, but we didn't know what a slam was at the time. We created a 7-minute piece with him to perform at sort of a variety night here called the DC Clown Cabaret that we were creating a lot of work for basically every month. And it was doing experimental new work stuff there at the Clown Cabaret when people started coming up to us and saying, oh, you need to go up to Black Cherry Puppet Theater in Baltimore because they do puppet slams. And we were like, what's a puppet slam?
Dun, dun, dun! And the rest is history.
Yeah, and then that became, we were doing clown cabarets every month, and we were doing puppet slams every month or 2 months whenever they had them. And it was such an impetus to create. And for new performers and new devisers, that was so valuable, because if you can only make a 5-minute piece, you can really explore a lot of different seeds, try it out in front of an audience, see what the audience likes and what you like and what you want to change, and then develop that into further work, which is what we ended up doing with Milo. And now it's a full-length show.
I think I first saw it... It was during the pandemic. I think I had heard about it, but the first time I actually saw both of you performing this was during the pandemic, and it might have been the O'Neill, like a puppet slam for the O'Neill. That was
it like a
Zoom.
pub night?
Yeah. Pub night for yeah. But what I loved about it was that you tweaked it for being online, and so you had little hearts fly up just like on Instagram. People are liking the screen, the little hearts fly up from the bottom. And I just thought that was so brilliant. So my question is, do you see this show, maybe the longer style show, do you see it as sort of a living show where you can swap pieces in and out? Or is this show pretty much set and Milo may do one-off things here and there? Or is this something you can add to?
Oh, absolutely, we can add to it. And it is a living show. And that's one of the reasons why I think we'll probably never tire of it, even in these many years that we've been working with this character. And that's 10 years now?
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Milo! Oh, lo, these many years, we're still finding new ways of exploring his world and taking joy from living in that world ourselves. I'd say nearly every time we have an opportunity to remount the show for an extended period of performances, we end up rolling up our shirt sleeves and digging our hands into the material head on. Okay, what's working and what's not? Is there an opportunity to reorder the sequence? Can we build a new puppet? We are very curious about how it can grow and evolve and open to listening.
Yeah.
What does it want to be? What does this show want to be? And what direction does it want to go in? And so, for example, Grant, performing online, we knew, well, okay, we're not in a traditional proscenium style theater, but we do have the proscenium of the camera. So things can come in from above. Well, or we take advantage of the fact that it is a virtual performance. So, and to acknowledge it as such, we need the floating Instagram hearts that are actually pieces of paper on a, chopstick, so to speak. But it is a living show.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, the fun, as terrible unequivocally the pandemic has been, it's afforded performers the obstacle to create in different ways. So it was really the pandemic that got us into more filmmaking and investing into better equipment and learning editing programs and learning how to make, a short puppet film as opposed to filming a puppet piece. So that's been a great experiment, and it's just an entirely new set of toys that you can play with. And if you have very small puppets in the show, you can change the choreography where then you hold them right up to the camera so then everyone can see all the meticulous little detail you put in there that, even in a small theater, they're not going to be able to see that. So we love it all.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, as I said, everyone, I'll put a link to the videos you have online for Milo, and people really need to check it out if they haven't seen it, and I hope someday that I'll get to see the full show, because I just know that I'll fall in love. But I was wondering, is there any trick that you'd love Milo to perform, but you just haven't figured out how to make it happen yet?
Oh boy, we want to put in a real magic trick into the Milo show.
Yeah, much of, for those of you who haven't seen Milo, a big part of the conceit is that we're doing it sort of dark art style, where we're totally in black velvet and there's black velvet behind us. So if, Milo needs to disappear a ball from his hand, you see him hold it up and cover his hand with it, and then Olmsted will take it and remove it, and then ta-da. But we purposefully leave the lights up enough so that all the audience members can see us doing that.
They're in on the joke.
Yeah, or they're in on the game.
They're in on the game.
Yeah,
that's it.
Here's this incredibly simple thing, but I think the charming fun of it is that to Milo, he's unaware of us as puppeteers. He's just like, isn't that incredible? I did this impossible thing. And so the audience can sort of segment their brains and watch it simultaneously as I see how this is being done, and I'm totally believing it. And
puppetry is so much about segmenting one's brain as an audience member,
right,
in this very exciting and yummy way that I think we're going to be talking about for the rest of our lives.
Right.
In the way it sort of asks you to invest so much into an object that is otherwise non-living, and to the point where you feel its emotions and you empathize with its plights or its successes or its woes. And so I love that. So I had to jump in because I love the way you described the segmentation of the brain for Milo, which feels like such a great way of describing what happens to the mind when one is in a puppet show.
Yeah. I think to answer your original question about dream trick, I'm not sure I have a specific trick in mind, but something that gets really messy on stage, you know, like a lot of shredded paper somewhere, or you know, big sort of confetti cannon style of just things totally falling apart.
One of those things you have to fill out the Puppet Slam form about. Going,
yeah,
like,
right.
Yes, there will be a mess to clean up at the end. Of
Yeah,
the show.
right. Like, make sure the MC has a lot of vamp material to talk about after this, and a push broom.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And again, I highly recommend people check it out. We're going to talk about Jim Henson Foundation grants and getting grants a little bit later. I have some questions about that. Milo the Magnificent got a Jim Henson Foundation grant. And your other production that got a 2020 Jim Henson Foundation grant was Marooned, a space comedy. And I watched the clips of this, from your website, and it just blew my mind. So I would love for you to talk about what that show is and how it came to be.
Sure thing. Marooned is a show about an astronaut who crashes on an unknown planet. Her ship is wrecked. She has this one robotic machine called Ada that can help her achieve certain tasks. But essentially, the whole show is her trying to get home. And we created a workshop version of it in 2019 and then applied for the grant. And we were approved so that we can further develop not only the narrative aspects of the piece, but also the puppetry, the puppet characters, and with the experience of the pandemic, in which we were dealing so much, I would say globally, we were dealing so much with themes of isolation and loneliness. It was very interesting to finally premiere the show earlier this year, a show that explores isolation and what it is to be far from home or to feel lost in space.
And a desire to return to a place of normalcy, which, then we were about to premiere it, and the pandemic hit, and so we were like, okay, well, we can't work on it right now because, like, the world's, who knows what the world is going to be like. And we, every couple months we'd check back in and sort of talk about the big themes, and that would inform the direction it takes. And like Olmsted said, people having this global shared experience of isolation and loneliness and wanting to return home definitely affected the show. And as sort of serious as that sounds, it is a comedy.
It is a comedy, and I think that's the funny thing too, is that that's the funny thing, is that it's so serious. But truthfully, this poor astronaut is in such dire straits, it just becomes absurd what she's having to go through. And the number of times that she tries and fails, and the awkward moments when she does succeed, it's sort of, the potential for comedy is actually quite high, I think, because the established situation is so dire, it can only really go in a lighter direction. And there is a lot of comedy throughout. So the show is essentially, there are two main characters: the astronaut, who I play masked, so you never see my face, in a full-on astronaut suit, and Ada, ATA, short for Autonomous Task Assistant, who is Alex. Ada is this ball head, essentially, with a blinking eye, and her legs, Ada's legs, are Alex's legs. And then there's a giant 8-foot moon screen that we project live puppetry onto, and we also project
overhead shadow puppetry. So that live, as in 3-dimensional live rod puppet figures, in addition to shadow puppets on the overhead projector.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because looking through all your stuff, you work in so many different styles of puppetry, and a lot of your, the clips I saw from Milo, there's a marionette version of him in there. And then especially this show, Marooned, there are so many, like watching the little trailer for it, I was like, oh my gosh, they're doing shadows. They're doing, hand puppets. They're doing Bunraku. They're doing everything, marionettes, everything. How do you go about deciding what style of puppetry to use for the different parts of your shows?
For me, it's so deeply informed by the story. I think in exploring the narrative and in writing the story, not only is there an eagerness in the back of my brain that's pervasive about wanting to mine all of the different forms of puppetry for the purposes of telling this story. I mean, that's true. I have a bias in wanting to incorporate many different styles, but it's often the story itself, which speaks to us like, oh, this would be most successful with rod puppets, or this would be most effective with a marionette. We have to consider everything, even when it comes down to these smaller choices. I would say smaller, but or I'd say more internal choices about what style of puppetry suits what aspect of the story. In part, it's all of these details are so important to us because we really feel that you see all in the audience. We often reference this quote in French that we use with happenstance. I think it was Marcel Marceau who said it, but tout se voit. So when you're in the audience, tout se voit essentially means you see all. Anything that happens on stage, you see. And so all of these more detailed choices that we make about what style of puppetry for what part of the story, for example, that's a part of it too. Fred Thompson, the marionette maker, once described carving these very beautiful detailed calves on the legs of a puppet who he knew would be wearing a long dress. Knowing that the audience would never see the legs, would never see these carved calves, but he knew that they were there. And for him, that was enough. So I'll let you, Alex, jump in from there.
Yeah, that tout se voit, I think, informs a lot of what we do. And like, I'm really big into creating aesthetically pleasing and comfortable controls for puppets, because if the control is well made and it looks well and it's comfortable to use, then the puppeteer is going to want to perform with it and want to rehearse with it and get better with it. But also, like, when you go out with a short strung marionette on stage, they're going to be able to see the control, so that should also be taken into account. So, you know, smooth curves and rounded corners and clean strings, and it shouldn't be all gummy up there and like backstage at an actual puppet show. Even when we're walking around backstage and you can barely see us, all of that is taken into the performance.
Mm-hmm. And also, layered on top of that, this is sort of a layered answer to your question, is using what we got. Also, it's going to look handmade because it is. So yes, attention to details are very important, but also for the cranky landscape for overhead projector shadow puppetry sequences, the landscape was made with duct tape. You can't tell that it's duct tape because it's in shadow on the large screen, but that was the material that was most effective for us to use when we were building that at that time, in that sense of using what we have. And I think what we love about puppetry is also that it's an analog form. You can see how it's done. You can see it's an object. You can see the person moving the object and how they're moving it. It's tactile. It's happening right now in person. And theater has so much illusion, and we love taking advantage of the multiple illusions that are at our disposal as theater makers in determining what style of puppetry we wish to use. It's informed by narrative, and it's also informed by how the kind of conceit or illusion we're tapping into for that particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we love it. We love it all. We love all kinds of puppets.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait. I hope someday to see Marooned too, because that just looks incredible. Oh. Many of your theatrical pieces have audience participation elements to it. Do you get nervous interacting with the audience, or do you welcome it? Are you excited by it?
I love it. I'm always pushing for more audience participation because of, you know, that unknown element, and you know, my favorite audience participation is when the audience is critical to the story, as opposed to Sometimes you see, like, I used to watch a lot of busking performances, like jugglers in New Orleans. They do a busking show, and a lot of audience participation for juggling buskers is, you bring somebody up and they're a prop, and you make them stand there and you make them hold a hat, and then you toss the ball into it, and then, like, they're not really necessary. Like, right. and oftentimes too, like, sometimes they'll even be made fun of a little bit, but, oh, it was all in good fun, let's give this guy a hand. And, like, that always gives me an icky feeling. So we always craft our audience participation where either they're making direct choices and they have a sandbox to play in. There's a very significant audience participation part in Marooned, where the audience is given specific lines to say on the overhead projector, but it casts them as this sort of almost communal hero, not Deus Ex Machina, but it's like, audience, like, you are all together giving this support.
You've been cast as a character in this show.
Right.
Essentially.
Yeah. And it's always so thrilling because, there hasn't been any audience participation up to that point, and it's, a good 3/4 of the way through the show. And so it's always a big thrill, when you put that first line up on the overhead projector and, it just says, like, audience in unison and then their line. And every show we've done with it, people have just, like, they take a second and read it. They take a second, like, are we really going to do this? And then everyone just jumps right on board. Mm-hmm. It's so satisfying. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like in our show Homebodies, we have a moment where we have, like, a telephone microphone hooked up to a speaker, and Olmsted's on the other end of the phone trying to make a phone call, and we just ring the bell and move the microphone telephone across the front row until somebody takes it and answers it. And then they just have an improvised phone call. We're not feeding them lines, or we're not leading them down a specific path. And so that's always exciting because the audience knows too, like, oh, anything could be said, and then they have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think audience participation for me fundamentally is tapping into what's special about theater. Because it's a live event happening in a space in real time with this group of people. And you can't get that with a film. Not that a film cinematic experience can't be thrilling or exciting or make me want to, laugh out loud or be moved to tears. But when you have a moment of audience participation, all of a sudden the person sitting next to you in the crowd is talking to the actors on stage. There's a sense of, like, oh, this isn't canned. This is happening right now.
Are they a plant?
Are they a plant? And then it's a moment that's very alive and very charged, and I love the kind of magic that brings. And certainly it is a little nerve-wracking, in addition to how exciting it can be, because we don't know what they're going to say. And yes, there's the potential for someone to say something that's not supportive or say something that is out of tune. I suppose that's the risk that we're taking. And so when we set those moments of audience participation in our shows, we try to lead up to it with a sense of, I guess, community building. Like, we work our way to that moment.
The shows never start with audience participation.
Exactly. Like, we establish the mood of the piece and how we're approaching things and how we're engaging with them. And we hope that they'll take our hand as opposed to smack it down. And so far, even with the more radical responses or the more unexpected kinds of offers we've received, they've been still playful enough for us to incorporate and sail along with and even do callbacks with later on in the piece.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to ask, you two have worked together for a long time, and sometimes having a partner in creative things, there can be a little friction and stuff like that. So I would love to know your advice for getting along with a creative partner and creating so many wonderful things like you have.
Yes, I would say be comfortable with killing your darlings. If we both feel strongly about an idea or a direction that something needs to go in, then sometimes we'll describe, okay, let's put a pin in that. Because invariably there are hundreds of other things that need to be solved or decided. And this is one sticking point, and it feels very important, but really it's one of many. So we put a pin in it and circle back to it. And invariably solving other aspects of the design or the story or even our order of operations, what we're going to build in what order. Invariably that'll be solved even by the bigger thing that felt so big will diminish just by focusing our attention on other things. So there's that. But then there's also a sense of, okay, I think I don't agree with you, but your logic is really good. So I think we need to go. I think we need to try it. Those two play in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Also, if you're working with a partner who you know you're going to be working with for a longer time, we've gotten really good about saying, like, that's a great idea, but it's not for this show. We'll save it for the next one. And thinking about that on the long scale, sometimes, especially if you're just getting started out in any kind of art or performance or various aspects of performing, you're like, oh, this is my core great idea that I've had for years and years and years, and I want it to be exactly how it's going to be. And it doesn't need to be that idea for your first ever puppet show. It probably shouldn't be, because you gotta make a lot of crap first, and get that out of your system, and then once you've built the skills and the dialogue and all that, then you can do your dream project. And then you can still keep doing more projects. Mm-hmm. So being okay with, like, oh, I had a really clever idea, but just because it's clever doesn't mean it's the right idea.
That's such an important lesson, too. It's like, objectively, it could be a great idea. Objectively, no question, 100%, it's a great idea. But is it right for this piece? Is it the best fit for this thing that we're making right now? Perhaps not. And it's no besmirch on your talents or your capacity as a writer or creator. It's really like, I think the freedom to just let it go. And if it is so damn great, it will eventually circle back.
And the best thing, one of the best things about making your own work is you can say things like, okay, well, I feel really strongly that it should be done this way. You feel really strongly it should be done that way. Let's try it your way for the first weekend and see how it feels. If it's fine, great, we'll stick with that. If we want to adjust it, we have a couple days off before the next weekend of shows, and then we can try it the other way. Mm-hmm. Like, it's, all the shows that you create can be living shows. You can always change things.
Right. Yeah, when you're in charge, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's your script.
Right.
You can do whatever you want. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about films and the films you have up on your website and on YouTube and stuff, because there's so many of them. We don't have time to talk about them all. But I did want to touch on a few of them. And one is Marianne's Onion, if I'm getting the title of that correct. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? Because it's based on a true story, correct?
It is. It's a true story of our friend Marianne Ross. Marianne, during the height of the pandemic in 2020, was not doing any grocery shopping for herself, and she was also going on long walks in the valley behind her house every day. So she was going on these long walks, and then neighbors or family members would drop off groceries at her front door, and every once in a while she would be missing key ingredients to make certain meals. And sure enough, she was out of onions, and she really wanted to make a meal with onions, but alas, it was a difficult time for us all. So on one of these walks, with that loss in mind, she saw something in the creek in the valley behind her house that didn't look like another rock in the creek, and it turned out it was a large store-bought onion. So she found exactly the thing that she had wanted. And it spirals into this musing of what it means to unexpectedly receive a mundane gift. So I heard this story in 2020, and I think that summer I heard her tell it at a distance outside. And I just knew I wanted to make a film about it. Marianne Ross is also, if you meet her, or if you get a chance to see the film, I mean, you can, she lives a life in Technicolor. She's just so vibrant and smart and witty and
a
thoughtful.
puppeteer.
And a puppeteer. Can you get better than that?
Yeah. So Olmsted had this story in mind, and then Heather Henson's Handmade Puppet Dreams sort of wanted to start a pandemic mini cohort of commissioned films, short puppet films.
Made in quarantine, essentially.
Right. They had already been doing this Handmade Puppet Dreams series, but they were, more production value, bigger established, and this was sort of their initiative to get puppeteers some work during the pandemic, and what can people do with less and, confined at home kind of thing.
And for us, what we were doing with less was essentially what we were doing with paper. We found that, especially when we weren't leaving our apartment, we were spending time outdoors, but space is limited, and we began working with paper in a way that was so much more focused than we'd ever worked with paper before. Mm-hmm. So we decided this would be a paper puppetry film with shadow puppetry, but with the backdrop. Majority of the backdrops in the film are natural ones, filmed on location in a creek. And paper is it's an extraordinary material. You can do so much with it, and it also packs flat.
Yeah. And so when we applied for this commission mini grant, they wanted a storyboard and an idea of the story. So we thought, okay, well, we have this story of Marianne finding an onion and then wondering how it got there. So that'll be like Act 1. And then Act 2 will come up with all these incredibly creative ways of how did that onion get in the creek. So from the mundane of it dropping out of somebody's grocery bag on the walk home to, the heightened extraordinary of like, oh, there was actually secret spy microfiche inside the onion in a FBI briefcase in a helicopter overhead, and they hit turbulence and it tumbled out. And so we came up with all these clever little things. And so we set a date with Marianne to record her telling the story in her basement. And we just kept the camera running after she told the story. And she was just sort of also talking about her musing about what it meant, and her talking to her neighbors and telling the story. And everyone was, all the neighbors, everyone's first reaction is trying to figure out and guess how it was done.
How that onion clearly like store-bought giant onion got in the creek. And in the process of her telling it, we sort of felt like, well, this is what the story is. It's not.
There were so many more interesting musings that she just had about like, what does it mean to receive a mundane gift, and is it a miracle, and how do you make sense of things that don't make sense, and all of that just rang so true to during the pandemic that we scrapped the original second half, and it just all came from that audio we recorded it.
Mm-hmm. And we had about an hour of audio footage, and so we just reorganized it and contextualized it, and
but then that's been super fun because having the also bigger support of Ibex Films and Handmade Puppet Dreams and all of that, we got to have people like Sam Koji Hale and Alex Griffin and Jessica Simon and that whole team sort of help us create a clear animatic before the film and create a clear storyboard and give notes on things, and then being able to, once it's done, send it around to film festivals. So we've gotten to have a little experience with that too, which has been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. How about, I mean, I know it may vary. You have several films up on your YouTube of varying length. But about like for Marianne's Onion, how long did that whole process take? Was it a month? Was it a couple months? Was it a year? How long did that go?
Well, goodness, I feel like several months from beginning to end. When we were actually shooting, we were shooting for about a month. And then we also did some reshoots. I would say that took about 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. But in leading up to it, all of the preparations, designing the puppets and figuring out the animatic and the storyboard, reworking the audio and reassembling and piecing it together. A couple months at least, probably, I'd say 3 or 4.
Yeah, on and off.
On and off.
It was it was pretty funny because we had this concept. Okay, we'll do shadow puppets, but they'll be filmed up close with a nature background. And so I built this hood that went over the camera so you could get like a truly silhouetted shadow puppet without getting a lot of spill on it. And that solved sort of the light problem. But then we realized like, oh, we're filming in like October and we're filming in the woods and the leaves are changing every day. So for like continuity, oh shoot, we gotta start speeding up our film shoots because soon there's not going to be any leaves at all.
No, I know. We were really racing against the clock.
And it was like a particularly cold October too, so
November, yeah.
So just like having like ice cold little fingers trying to manipulate, and you know what it's like manipulating something small up close. Like you see every little jitter and shake like that your hands have. So it's like, stabilizing your arms against your body as much as you can. And oh boy.
This sounds like a good opportunity to share the 3 P's of puppetry.
Please do.
Perspiration, pain, and partial blindness. When you get in the weirdest little sort of physical shape.
And you can't see what you're doing.
You can't see what you're doing, and you start to sweat and shake, and maybe it also hurts a little bit, then you're a puppeteer.
That's when you know it's working.
That's right.
Well, I wanted to ask, on your website, too, you have a lot of great build videos and tutorials. You show everything from making shadow puppets and like using a Cricut machine to make the puppets and to writing shows to even warm-ups for puppeteers. Have you found that sharing your work in this way, beyond just posting videos of your performances, has been a worthwhile thing?
Absolutely. I think for a few different reasons. One being, we just feel it's so important to share information between puppeteers and between artists, because the more information we can give young artists that are just starting out and just get them up and running with better information sooner, the sooner they can start making really brilliant work that then will inspire us. And it just, rising tide raises all ships. And then secondfold, it's great way of discovering sort of the different crossover of information. Like one of our earliest sort of tutorial build videos was about levers and 4-bar linkages, which I got really into with shadow puppets and automata and papercraft and things like that. And so, I made this video about levers and 4-bar linkages and what are the 3 classes of levers and how does a 4-bar linkage work and all that. And we put it up on our channel, and it's so funny. It's like, it's consistently our most watched video. Like if you go into analytics, it's like always at the top. And we realized like a lot of like young mechanical engineer students who were learning about that stuff search for it. And it's one of the things that come up. So even though we're teaching it in the concept of like, or context of creating paper shadow puppets, it's still the concept. So I like to think of, those mechanical engineers learning the concept, but also being like, oh, but also, what if I got into puppetry?
I know, join the dark side.
Yeah. And it's so fun for us to, make a video. Like, we made one on how to straighten wire, right? You get like coiled galvanized wire from like the big box hardware store, and you want to make it straight for an arm rod or a mech or something. And so we learned this a couple great ways to straighten wire, but it was in posting the video that inspired or prompted other people to comment about ways they know to straighten wire that then brought stuff to my attention that now I use that method instead of a lot of the stuff that I taught. So it's like, ooh, that's great. Yeah, it's just like the big YouTube university of self-teaching.
Yeah, I always joke that if you need to do something, there's like a 12-year-old in Alabama who will show you how to do it on YouTube. And the correct way, just they're geniuses.
Yeah. It reminds me of if you want to know the answer to something online, you don't ask the question, you post yourself doing it wrong, saying that's how you do it, and then everyone comes out of the woodwork being like, actually, you should be using 14 gauge wire instead of 16. It's like, yeah, all right, gotcha.
Well, I mentioned it before, and I wanted to just touch on it briefly. You have received a couple different grants from the Jim Henson Foundation and the Greenbelt Community Foundation and a couple other places. What goes into getting a grant? I mean, I know the details may be different for different things. Because I've kind of heard that it's a bit of work. Like, it's not just, you fill out an online application and then you may get some money. There's a process behind it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a process behind it, and I take it very seriously. It's a little bit like creative writing meets getting the perfect pitch. As in, it's this quite challenging creative writing assignment in which you are speaking very confidently and selling yourself in addition to world building with language. Maybe I'm not making sense.
Well, it's also very much like building the plane while it's flying,
yes,
kind of thing. Because
right.
You're all the time, almost all the time, at least for us, we're writing grants for shows that we haven't yet built because we need the grant money to build the show. And a lot of the time, the grant wants to be like, "What is your show about? How long is it? Do you have any photos of it?"
Yeah.
So then it becomes this thing of like, well, let me talk very generally about the way this theoretical show makes me feel to communicate that in a way that makes you excited about it to give us money.
Right, exactly. And then the general speaking of how it feels to make you excited about it to give us money then becomes very specific speaking that's kind of playing with language and coming off as incredibly confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to a certain extent we're confident enough to write that grant.
Yeah, and I think it's not a false confidence because the people giving the grants want to feel confident that you are going to go through with your project, right? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who have a great idea for a show or an installation or a piece of artwork that then get the money that then, it just doesn't follow through. So the main thing I feel like with grant writing is, having a really stimulating idea and convincing the people that you can accomplish it and that you need that money to accomplish it. Right.
And you're right, Alex. It's not a mask that we put on when it comes to speaking confidently about the work or about the value of our company or the value of this project. It is coming from a baseline of two very serious artists who are seriously going to make this show and seriously need this money to make it. And when it comes to the support of a prestigious organization like the Jim Henson Foundation, it's not only the funding that is an essential piece of the puzzle, but it's also the prestige. This award will help us sell tickets, and ultimately, we're gigging actors. And we are splitting the box office sales. So we need people to come see this show that hasn't been made yet. But we shall make it. And we shall fulfill all requirements of the organization and credit where credit is due. So yes, it's its own assignment of it's its own creative endeavor.
And it's also just great practice, because usually the things you write about your show for a grant application, or the way you describe your show for a grant application, can then be used, for like a press release or an electronic press kit after the show is made. Because when you want to start shopping your shows around, you're going to want like a clean, concise description of the show to include in that. So when you hand it over to a venue or a theater that may want to present you, they'll be able to use that language to sell to their donors or give information to their subscribers. It's just a great exercise.
It is a great exercise. And it's like it's a temperature taking moment too, because they'll ask really big questions that feel unanswerable. Why is your work important? Oh gosh, I mean, it can put you in a very uncomfortable place very quickly. But honestly, like, okay, we're gonna go there. Why, indeed?
Oh my gosh!
And then just in the process of answering that, it's sort of a re-sharpening of why we are doing this at all. Like, why are we engaged in this crazy business that is making theater and making art? It's it's a steep climb. There's no question. And it can be very, very challenging. And why, indeed, is coming back to the home of the thing. Like, well, it's because we love it to bits.
Yeah.
And we are so committed to doing it, come hell or high water. Maybe I should re-edit that. Come
heck
or high water.
Hell is okay. You can say hell.
Hell.
It's an
Oh hell.
It's an interesting, it's a good segue, because I was going to ask too. It's you have these shows, you have Milo and Marooned and your other theatrical type shows. How do you go about getting bookings for these shows? Is it sort of word of mouth, like you get reviews from other people and the theater go, oh, we want to bring them in, or are you out there pushing yourself? How does it work?
A big part of it is word of mouth. And specifically sort of word of mouth at festivals. We love doing festivals, especially like stuff through Puppeteers of America. We'll be doing Marooned actually at the 2023 National Festival in College Park, Maryland. And doing work at festivals is great, because a lot of people that come to festivals also run theaters either nationally or internationally, and they're there looking for shows to book. So every time we do a festival, we usually book at least one show from that. And then it's making connections then with those people and figuring out like, oh, well, now you are based here and you have a better idea of the community here and the other theaters here. Like, who should we reach out to? So maybe we can book another gig while we're in that area, because it can help defer travel costs for that first group, or they'll just be able to reach us out to a bigger audience base. So doing festivals is great. Reaching out to previous theaters that we've done shows with before, of course, is great. We're lucky enough to be a resident company at Baltimore Theater Project up in Baltimore, Maryland. So we know every year we have a slot there where we can do whatever we want. Chris Fingston, who runs it, is super supportive and generous with that, and sort of gives us free reign over whatever we want to do. So also, when you're doing shows, whether they be your own shows or just a show that you're acting in, invite people from other theaters nearby and offer them comps to come see. So you can say like, blank theater, I love the kind of shows that you put on. Maybe, you have a space for us in your, smaller black box theater for a smaller show this size sometime. I'd love for you to come out. We'll put a couple comp tickets under your name if you have the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you two have a Patreon where people, and it's, for those that don't know, it's a website where people can support creative works and people that are working on creative things. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided setting up a Patreon site so that people can support you?
Yeah, I think I first heard about Patreon from it being plugged on podcasts and things. A lot of podcasts that I liked have Patreons, and I always felt a little uncomfortable about it. I think having that, normal artist dilemma of, like, it's really difficult to ask people for help. It reached a point where we just decided, hey, we have several family members who have said, hey, we'd like to support you in some way if you had something like this set up. So we just decided to do it. And it turned out to be incredibly helpful, both income-wise, bringing us in the funds that we need to let us not have to take maybe smaller gig jobs or non-arts related jobs. It lets us take time at home to really dedicate to our art that then become the shows. But also in creating, specific behind the scenes content that we get to share with our patrons has gotten us really good about documenting the process. And I feel like that's been a huge help for us, especially when people have specific questions about, how did you make this? Or what's it like to tour here? Or how do you store your things? And then that inspires us to, like, oh yeah, well, we should make a video about that specific type of joint, or about, how we carved this thing. And it's become a backstage journal over the last several years.
Excellent. I love it. Do you have any sort of tips or tricks, like maybe what works for you, what doesn't work on Patreon? Because I know, I have a Patreon, and I had levels when I started out, and then, after maybe about a year, I was kind of like, yeah, I think we can rework this. I think it can be better. So do you have any, things that you think work really well for your Patreon?
We really like to, at a certain tier, like the $5 and up tier, credit people in our videos. At the end of the videos, we'll have the rolling credits. And it really, for us, it's very encouraging to see a lot of names of people that support us. I think for the patrons, it's a very real way to see what they're supporting. And for new people, it's like, oh yeah, I want to be part of a group that helps make cool art like this. And it's really that group of people that's funding it for the people who can't afford it, to make it available to all.
I love it.
Yeah.
If folks want to find out maybe where you're performing and come see a show, where can they go, and what can they look for to see you guys live?
Thank you for that wonderful question, Grant. We are performing all the time, and on our upcoming page on our website, alexolmsted.com, we have a list of all upcoming performances. So whether they be local to us here in Maryland, Baltimore, or the DC area, or they be local to you, perhaps in New Mexico next year, or Michigan, just keep an eye out there, and we will be coming to a theater near you.
Yeah, and of course, following us on the socials at Alex and Olmsted. And Olmsted is spelled Olmsted. There's no A in it.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Alex.
Yeah, I will have links to all that stuff in the show notes as well.
Sure.
Well, as we wrap up here, I always like to ask, as my final question, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Oh, boy.
And you can pick more than one. You don't have to pick the same. You could each pick more than one, is what I'm saying.
I'd have to say the highlight of my puppetry career is sort of an amalgamation of a few different things, but it's all on the same theme. We recently got to take a short segment of Milo to Germany and do it for a TV show out there called Die Puppenstars.
Which translates
yeah.
literally to...
The Puppet Stars, which is like, it's sort of an America's Got Talent style variety show, but all puppetry. And so we got to go to Germany, and we got to do a festival in South Korea, in Chuncheon, and we got to go to the Festival of Wonder in Denmark. And by creating a wordless show that's all ages appropriate, we've been able to travel the world in a way that normally, working artists wouldn't be able to. And that has been such a highlight for me.
Excellent. Olmsted, do you have you narrowed it down?
Oh, my land. I suppose because we're so in the middle of performing older material and making new material, I feel like being in it, it's harder for me to distance myself from it, to reflect on what has transpired, because it feels like we're in the machine and the machine is actively running. I'm not outside of the machine looking at it and seeing what it looks like and how it sounds from afar. It's sort of like when you're cooking a meal and it's at a certain point you don't know if it tastes good or not because you've been smelling it and tasting it for hours.
I have a second non-performing related one.
Well, yes, you go.
Oh, well, it's just, so we were at the O'Neill in 2017, and I remember being in the basement one time. I had my stuff laid out on one of the tables, but we were over by the bandsaw watching Jim Rose cut some pieces. And I looked over and I saw Philip Huber, who has been a past guest on the show.
Yeah.
And I saw Philip Huber sort of peeking over and taking a look at one of my controls that I had brought. And that was a little moment where I was like, oh my God, Philip Huber is looking at my control secretly. So that felt good.
We caught you, Philip, if you're listening.
Yeah, Philip. Happy belated birthday.
As I reflect on this question, I really think my answer is going to be similar to Alex's, which is how Milo has taken us around the world, and being able to go to a new country whose culture I'm unfamiliar with and whose language I don't know, but to be there with a cultural offering is really unique. It's different from being a standard tourist. And anytime we'd walk into a shop or go to a restaurant, sharing the information that we're here with a festival, where we've brought a show, is always welcomed so warmly. I think this kind of, dare I say, cultural diplomacy that's sort of imbued with the experience has been perhaps the greatest takeaway for me. We wouldn't be able to make these trips or go to these places otherwise. It's an unexpected and very rewarding element to our careers.
Excellent. Well, Alex Olmsted, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me on Under the Puppet today.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks, everybody at home.
Thank you, Grant.
Many thanks to Alex and Olmsted for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 79, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my chat with Alex and Olmsted, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. And if you'd like to see Alex and Olmsted perform live at the 2023 National Puppetry Festival happening July 18th through the 22nd at University of Maryland, head to puppeteers.org for more information and to register. We'll see you there. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 78's giveaway for a copy of Ventriloquism Made Easy by Paul Stadelman and Bruce Fife. The question was, what material does Danny Joe Labrecque use to build the sets for Danny Joe's Treehouse? And the answer was hard pink foam insulation board from Home Depot. And the winner is Julie Scarborough. Congratulations, Julie. Your ventriloquism book is on the way, and I can't wait to see your new act. This episode, we're giving away a Jim Henson Company gift bag filled with some fun Jim Henson Company items. Now, I'm not going to tell you what's in there, but trust me, You want this gift bag. To be entered to win, all you have to do is answer this question from the episode you just heard. In Alex Olmsted's piece Marianne's Onion, where did the main character find the onion in question? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by January 15th, 2023. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the February 2023 episode of the show. One entry per household, and due to recent issues shipping the prizes to winners, these giveaways are now only open to those listeners with a mailing address in the United States of America. Good luck! Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make the show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Andrew Calcagno, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, and Dorothy Pachoco. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604, or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send your suggestions via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2023 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.